thank you all for coming to our latest technical assistance webinar for the CEJA workforce development programs. We're focused on writing an effective proposal for the NOFOs that are currently out and available, the Clean Jobs Workforce Network program and the Energy Transition Navigator program. My name is Brian Richard. I'm with the Center for Governmental Studies at Northern Illinois University, and my team, along with the team from the Smart Energy Design Assistance Center, CDAC, at the University of Illinois, are working with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to get these programs up and running. I know it seems like it's taking a long time, but there's a lot of moving pieces with these programs, and hopefully these two, if all goes well, will be up and running by the end of the year this year. Technology to work. Yep, so I'm just going to have a very brief introduction to the two programs this afternoon, and then going over some basics for preparing a strong proposal for programs like this. And then we're going to walk through some of the details of the NOFOs, and then finally talk about how to put together a good submission and how to submit your application. Just, so a high overview of the CEJA workforce programs. There are 4 equity-focused workforce programs named in the CEJA legislation. The CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, the Climate Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program. That NOFO has been closed, and applications for that funding opportunity are currently under review. There are 2 programs currently open and available for applications, the Clean Jobs Workforce Network program and the Energy Transition Navigators program. The 4th program, the Returning Resident Clean Jobs Training Program. This one's just more complicated to get up and running. It's designed to be administered within the correctional facility, so there's a lot of things that need to happen before this can get up and running, but we do hope to get that NOFO released again by the end of the year this year. And so the design of these programs is to train equity eligible individuals to prepare them for jobs in the clean energy industry or apprenticeships in clean energy related occupations, and then to provide the workforce. These workforce programs are just a piece of the overall CEJA legislation, so that there's lots of funding going into clean energy infrastructure, both state and federal funding, and that there is going to be a need for significant workforce to implement all of that investment. So this is designed to help people get prepared to participate in those projects. We'll start with a brief overview of the Clean Jobs Workforce Network program. There was a bidders conference focused on this program and the Navigator program last Friday. The recording of that bidders conference should be available soon and on the website for this. There's the website is listed there at the bottom of the slide where that recording will be available. Broadly speaking, though, the Workforce Network Hub program is designed to recruit participants into the program, deliver training at the locations, or connect participants to training programs at other training providers such as community colleges and private sector training providers. Develop partnerships with employers to facilitate the hiring of the participants that complete their training, provide barrier reduction services to help the participants both participate in the training programs, but also successfully transition into into those job opportunities, and then continue to provide those transition services after they've completed training and as they move into employment. This is kind of a graphic of what these what these hubs will look like. We're bringing in the participants, doing some pre-assessment to determine what the appropriate training, if appropriate, bridge program training will be provided. Some participants will go directly into the job-specific training. And as I said, there's going to be some new clean energy training programs at the hubs. They'll be connected along with funding to existing clean energy training programs. And these programs will include work-based learning or on-the-job training as they're going through the training programs. These training programs will lead to industry recognized certifications. There'll be support in obtaining those certifications, including testing support, tutoring, other support services to help the participants successfully succeed in the training program and achieve those certifications, and then help them transition into job and successfully maintaining the job after they leave the program. Community-based organizations are eligible to apply for these network hubs, and this is spelled out in the CEJA legislation that community-based organizations include community colleges, nonprofits, and local governments, but really looking for organizations that provide employment, skill development, or other related services to members of their community. Need to have at least one location in the community or region it serves, and really demonstrate that the organization has built relationships with local residents and other organizations within the community. Looking for organizations that really are embedded in their communities. Just under 23 million total funding available for the training programs, in addition to barrier reduction funding of $15 million. These are annual amounts spread over 13 award sites. Brief overview of the Energy Transition Navigator program. There actually have been a couple of bidders conference webinars that have covered this. One again was that webinar last Friday that the recording will be available. Another one was held back several weeks ago in June, and that recording is available. I think it's linked on this website here. So transition navigators they're designed to help support all of the workforce programs, make connections between the programs, make connections from the programs to potential participants, make connections with the programs to employers, to apprenticeship programs, really to, again, make the connections within the community, build relationships between the training programs, and employers, and apprenticeship programs, and just really to assist in the success of the workforce programs that are focused on training participants. Again, community-based providers eligible for the Navigator program. Here the legislation defines community-based providers as not-for-profit organization that has a history of serving low-wage or low-skilled workers or individuals from economically disadvantaged communities. Again, looking for organizations that have demonstrated relationships within their communities with other resident-focused organizations, employers in the region, other training programs, an ability to make those connections and a history of making those connections would be the ideal organization to deliver these services. So that's, again, a brief introduction to the two programs. I'm going to walk through some overall tips for preparing a strong proposal. The first is just read through the NOFO carefully. When you get the proposal, read it through from front to back. It's a long, it's a dense document. There's a lot of information, but I think if you read through it from start to finish to start with, you can come back to it, start focusing on specific sections to get understanding. Have a highlighter as you're reading through and highlight points that you think are important. Go back and start making notes about key sections. You might have questions. There might be some things in there that aren't clear to you, and we'll talk about how you can ask questions in addition to the chat here today. Start discussing it with your team about how you're going to address the various components that are listed in the NOFO. There's a number of definitions, very specific definitions included in the NOFO. Some of these include what exactly is meant by community-based organizations, equity investment eligible persons, equity investment eligible communities. These definitions are all very important. They're spelled out in the legislation. And so applications that don't address the requirements spelled out in these definitions are not going to be successful. DCO is required to deliver these programs the way it's spelled out in the NOFO, and most of these definitions are spelled out in the legislation. And so don't make up your own version of what you think an equity investment eligible person is. For example, there's a very specific definition in the NOFO that comes from the legislation, and DCO is required to follow those guidance from the legislation. After you've read through it, think about whether your organization or whether you can put together a team of organizations that is a good fit to deliver the services that are described in the NOFO. Does this opportunity align well with your organization's mission and its capabilities? Are there other organizations that you might partner with to strengthen your application? I think for all of these CJA programs, the benefits of partnering, of having multiple partners, I think are really viewed favorably. Some overall tips for preparing a strong proposal. Make sure you understand the content of the NOFO and respond to it. Your proposed program design should align with the requirements and the program descriptions in the NOFO. And we're going to walk through some review criteria. You can really see how it will guide your proposal development. Tell your story. Highlight the strengths of your team. What are some demonstrated successes that you've had on similar types of projects? Make a case for your project and its potential impact. So notice that I didn't put tell your story first before respond to the content of the NOFO. You can tell your story in a very great, very impressive way. But if it doesn't fit with the content of the NOFO, you're not going to get funded because you're not demonstrating that you can successfully deliver the services that are spelled out in the NOFO. And then finally, always thinking about, as you're going through at every step, think about what is my staffing needs? Who on my staff, on my existing staff, can deliver this portion of the program? Or do I need to either partner with another organization to fill that need? Or am I going to need to hire somebody and bring them into my staff to fulfill that role? Think about the budget. How much is it going to cost? Obviously, staffing is a big part of that, but there are other program services, program costs that you're going to need to think about and be realistic about as you're going through this. And again, partnerships, if you see some weaknesses in your organization relative to the way the program is designed, look for partners that you can work with to use each other's strengths and make a better, stronger proposal. So now we're going to walk through some key sections of the NOFO. NOFO is available for download at the websites I showed earlier. The specific examples I'm going to talk about here are in the Workforce Network program, but the process that I'm going to go through when I'm looking at those sections will be exactly the same if you're looking at the Navigator NOFO. The details are going to be a little different, of course, but the process of thinking about and addressing these key sections of the NOFO is exactly the same. So for those of you that have had a chance to look at the NOFO, are there some questions you had about it already? I see there are a number of chat. I'm not able to see the chat, unfortunately, with my setup here, but have there been some questions that have come up that you might want to ask? And just to be clear about questions that are asked in the chat today, our team will do our best to respond to the questions, but those that we either are not able to get to or we aren't prepared. Some questions are more difficult than others for us to respond to, and so if we don't get to your question in the chat, we will add that question to the list of frequently asked questions on the NOFO website, and so the responses will be published to all of the questions, whether we get to them today live in the chat or not. I see somebody, I did figure out how to see the chat. Somebody asked about how partnerships would work. So partnership, might be between an organization that is, they have a good, they're a training provider, for example, that they have all of the necessary skills and history of providing the occupational training for these programs, but they don't have experience with case management, supportive services, wraparound services. So they might reach out to another community-based organization that can provide those case management and wraparound services and work with the participants on those. So, putting two organizations with different strengths together would make the application stronger overall. And we're hosting a number of partnership networking events that I will talk about a little later to give you an opportunity to meet with potential partners in your regions if you're looking for partners. So these are the sections, and these NOFO sections are standard across all DCEO NOFOs. It starts with an overall program description, and there's a lot of detail in that program description. That's really the meat of the NOFO. I guess I should stop. I'm not sure I said what NOFO stands for. It's Notice of Funding Opportunity is what NOFO stands for. The funding information just describes how much funding is available, how many grants they expect to fund with that overall level of funding, eligibility, what types of organizations are eligible for the funding, application and submission information. This really outlines exactly how your submission should be structured and what should be addressed. I'm going to be walking through that section in detail later in this session. And then there's the application review information, walks through exactly how the applications will be reviewed and scored to determine which applications get funded. And then some award administration information, just some details about what happens through the process of awarding the funding to the successful applicants, and some requirements afterwards, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then contact information at DCEO for information about the NOFO. And then many NOFOs have appendices with more detailed information. These NOFOs have attachments to them that I'll talk about towards the end of this session. So this, if you go to the NOFO website, that on the right, you can see what the web page looks like. Don't forget to look under the resources section. I've put a box around it in red down below and blown it up on the left side, where there's links to the actual legislation. So you can go look at the legislation and see what the wording within the legislation is. A number of links to information about that's related. The CJA, the Climate Equitable Jobs Act implementation page, provides updates as NOFOs are released. That's, I think, where you can find the FAQs, the frequently asked questions, and the responses to that. That Clean Jobs curriculum framework is going to be very important for the Workforce Network program. That provides a framework for the job training programs that are expected to be included as part of these Workforce Network hubs. The next one, the Clean Energy Jobs and Training Program Inventory Report. That's where you can find existing training programs in your local area. Here, that might be a source of partnerships for applicants as well, looking for organizations that are already delivering clean energy training. And then a number of other kind of background information that can be helpful as you're filling out your application. Hub locations, and again, this is spelled out in the legislation. This is as much detail as is in the legislation. So, you know, the organizations that are successful in applying for hubs in each of these locations, that will determine, you know, the exact location. But this is the expectation, is that the hub locations will be located in these communities across the state. Who will the program serve, the network hubs serve? The legislation it took us a long time to understand this and be able to describe this. And so it really breaks the target population down into thirds, and it's the first 2/3 are really based on geography, where the participants live. And so there are environmental justice areas and R3 areas. Environmental justice areas are communities that have been impacted by environmental related issues, such as pollution, history of environmental injustice. R3 areas were developed as part of the cannabis legalization legislation. And so there's these two sets of target communities, regions. And so the legislation states that at least 1/3 of program participants, and these, I should say, these regions overlap. And so 1/3 of the participants should come from areas that are included in both environmental justice and the R3 areas. Another 1/3 of participants should come from residents that are located in either an environmental justice or R3 area. So there are some cases where communities are included in both of the areas. There are other cases where communities are in one or the other. The NOFO, this section of the NOFO states that 2/3 of the participants should come from residents of environmental justice or R3 areas, that bottom section. Again, we've really struggled to describe this. That is inclusive of those residents that are in both areas. So anybody that is in both an environmental justice and an R3 area would also be eligible to be counted towards being one of the other. So that's why it says 2/3 there, but it can be a little misleading. And then finally, the remaining slots in the program are prioritized for displaced energy workers or other people with barriers to employment, including things like the formerly incarcerated and other populations with barriers. Here's an example of what those regions look like. As you can see, it's a patchwork of areas across the state, and we're developing some maps that will make it easy for grantees to determine whether participants are located within these regions. But it's not as easy as saying, well, this city is part of the target regions and this city is not, or even counties. It really is, like I said, a patchwork across communities. Chicago, a lot of the Chicago area, especially on the south and west sides, are included, but we'll need to develop those tools to make sure we can track the participants that are from those areas. But as you're developing your proposal, think about how you're going to reach the residents of these communities and what sort of staffing implications does that have for your project, and then the budgets and partnerships you might need to reach these communities. So now we're going to start highlighting some of the sections from the NOFO. And so a section of the NOFO is called the overall program design. And this language here, project funded from this program must include the following program elements and are encouraged to incorporate national best practices. That language is directly from the NOFO. And so that's the first line of this section. So it's telling you, you need to understand all of the different components in this program design section, and your application should address each of these program elements. So, as you're going through, again, highlight sections you think are important, and then start making a list of pieces. All of these bullet points come from that little section that I highlighted. So You're going to have to work with the energy transition navigators and other workforce entities. Your program is going to have to address how they're going to recruit and pre-screen participants, how you're going to provide training or provide access to training, how you're going to engage with employers, how you're going to provide your participants with transition services to employment, and then how you're going to partner with other organizations to provide all of these services. So those program requirements, they're listing what you need to do. Your program, your proposal is going to describe how that you're going to address those requirements. How are you going to deliver work-based learning? How are you going to create an inclusive outreach strategy? How are you going to coordinate with other programs? You know, we really want to see in your application the how about these. It's not enough to just to say, oh, our program will include work-based learning. We want to see how that you're going to incorporate that into your program. And you might want to make a table like this. Start writing down ideas. You know, what are some of the things we're going to do around recruiting equity eligible participants? You know, what do we know about best practices for recruiting equity eligible participants? What are some best practices for pre-screening at enrollment? Start thinking about how. So just start organizing your ideas around these program requirements and start making notes about how that you're going to deliver and address these requirements. And then again, how does this relate to the staff that you're going to need on your team or in your partners? The budget requirements. You know, you might be proposing to do some advertising, some marketing for your program as part of your recruiting. You need to have some budget attached to that. What are partnerships that you might use to help with each of these elements? So another example, looking at transition services. You know, this paragraph describing what transition services and follow-up are required components. Again, just start making your list. We need to assist our participants in transition to jobs or other training programs. We need to provide continued case management and transition services after they've completed our program. This is somewhat unique to these CJA programs. Many other public workforce development programs don't have these transition services, or at least not to this extent, where there's really an emphasis on continuing to provide those supportive services and barrier reduction services to participants after they've completed your program and have moved into employment. And the NOFO states, you know, for at least a year, these services should be available to folks that have completed your program. And again, start organizing your thoughts around these requirements. You know, we need to help participants transition to further training or employment. You know, who's going to be in charge of that on your staff? What partnerships do you need? You know, how are you going to deliver those, and what are the budget implications for that? Another example, pretty detailed staffing expectations in the NOFO. There are staff roles spelled out within the NOFO, as well as an attachment, a required attachment that we'll talk about a little later, that you know, lists those various roles. And So this will help you organize and think about who is going to fill each of these roles, and whether they're going to be within your organization or within a partner organization. So here, another way you might think about addressing components like this, so for all of the staffing requirements in the NOFO, is there somebody at my organization already on my staff that can provide this role or step into this role? Yes, I know exactly who this is going to be. We've got it covered. You know, we might have somebody that can work with outreach and recruitment, but we're going to need some help. You know, we're going to work with energy transition navigators on that, but we might also have some other partners that we might want to bring. Instruction, maybe we don't have somebody on staff right now to deliver the instruction that we're planning to deliver, but we plan on hiring somebody into our organization to deliver that instruction. Or maybe we need to look at either a subgrantee or other partner. Yeah, so just walk through each of those roles and you know, think about what needs to happen for you to cover each of those roles. When you're thinking about partnerships with other organizations, there's some important definitions that they're important because of the way they're dealt with within your application. So the main grantee, the one that is putting this project together and will be the one submitting the application, leading the partnership if they have partners, they're what is called the main grantee. There may be sub-grantees or sub-recipients that carry out part of the award. So in my example earlier, if you're primarily a training provider that is going to partner with another community-based organization that's going to deliver the case management, barrier reduction services, that partner will likely be a sub-grantee. So they're named in your grant application, and they have a very specific portion of the scope of work that is spelled out in your application. And then a contractor or vendor, that's somebody that is just providing some supplies or materials. You know, maybe your training program requires some training materials that need to be purchased from a vendor. So that's just what's called a contractor, and some funds will flow to them, but they don't necessarily have a part in carrying out the scope of work. They're just providing some supplies or other materials that are needed for the program delivery. And so how do those various roles play out as you're submitting your application? The main grantee has to be GATA pre-qualified, and there's a completely separate webinar focused on GATA qualification, and so I'm not going to go into that here. So the main grantee must be GATA qualified. The sub-grantee does not have to be, but they must be in good standing with the state, which means they can't have things like existing grants that they have not been successful in delivering services on, or things like that, or they whatever would make you not in good standing with the state. Are you on the record and named within the grant? The main grantee obviously is the sub-grantee. If they have a specific scope of work with a budget attached to it, then yes, they will also be on in the grant, in the budget, named in the budget to receive grant funds. The sub-grantee also requires a memorandum of understanding, spelling out that partnership between the two organizations. Specifically what services the sub-grantee is going to provide, and for what funding, so that there's a clear understanding of that relationship and the services and related funding that will be provided. And that MOU is not required for vendors. Obviously, the main grantee has to develop their own budget. A subgrantee, if they're receiving more than 150,000 of the total project costs, they also are required to develop their own detailed budget. But a detailed budget is not required if they're receiving less than 150,000 of grant funds. Subgrantees also need to be included in the staffing plan, because presumably they're going to be filling specific staffing roles that are required. And then included on the NOFO project plan in your written description, again, yes, the subgrantee needs to be included in the project plan. Contractor, that probably really should say maybe if they've been identified ahead of time and you know exactly what you're going to purchase from a vendor as part of your project, then it should be included. But some things, maybe you have some building materials or something that you know you're going to need, but you may not have a contractor or vendor specifically identified, and that would not be included in your proposal or your project plan. So let's look at another section of the program description, an equity-focused program culture. So the NOFO states that DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which is defined in the NOFO, in the definition section of the NOFO, must inform all aspects of your program. So you should be thinking about that in all sections of your NOFO. Not just have a paragraph about DEIA tacked on to the end. You need to be thinking about this when you're talking about all sections of your application. You need to demonstrate that you're considering the background and experience of participants, that you're considering equity in outreach and enrollment. How are you going to address barriers to entry and barriers to success in your program? How are you going to demonstrate that your program fosters a sense of shared identity, welcoming and inclusive environment? Then again, as always, consider equity in your training programs and in your partnerships. Again, just figure out whatever works best for you to organize your thoughts and start putting together how you're going to address each component of the NOFO. What works for me may not work for you, but just think about ways to organize your response as you're reading through the NOFO. Again, as always, this is really important that you don't get to the end of your application, then figure out, well, what's my budget? It's much easier to think about this as you go step by step through each section. Like, what is the staffing requirement to deliver these services? What's the budget requirements? Are there partnerships that I'm going to need? And then wraparound services. This is a very important component of the CEJA legislation. There are significant funds dedicated to barrier reduction funding that are included in this funding opportunity for the workforce hubs. There are really two funding sources going into this single NOFO. One is for the workforce hubs and the other is for the barrier reduction program. So the successful grantees are expected to not only deliver the training, outreach training, transition services, but also to administer the barrier reduction funds. And so this section is really important, where it walks through many of the common barriers that might need to be addressed for participants in workforce programs, but this is not exhausted. There's the category at the bottom, other wraparound services. So, there may be other issues that your participants are facing that can be addressed through these barrier reduction funds. And this is a pretty extensive section of the NOFO. So yeah, you must demonstrate how you're going to be flexible in delivering these wraparound supports. In our work with workforce development programs, we find that participants a lot of times don't identify their barriers, in an entrance interview or in an entrance evaluation process. It takes time for them to open up, in some cases, to build trust with the program staff. And so you may identify barriers, later on at the midpoint of the program that maybe they existed all along, but you're just now learning about the barriers. And so we really need to have a lot of flexibility in the way that we administer and deliver these wraparound supports. And again, these wraparound supports continue as the participants transition into employment for up to a year after they've completed your program. Student support services, so kind of the academic supports, are also included as part of this section, where things like tutoring, makeup classes, makeup testing, mentorship, things like that, where it's supporting them through the academic portion of the training program. So really want to see how you're going to deliver those student supports, the academic supports, as well as the wraparound supports. And again, find partners if you need to. Again, so I think this is really difficult to project what the costs might be, but I think having an estimate of overall costs for delivering supportive services, barrier reduction services, is important. Not necessarily at the specific level of each type of supportive services, but an overall budget for delivering. And there's significant funds available for these services, but it's also going to require staff. Again, like I said, building trust with participants as they go through the program is really important to addressing barriers to participation, to completion, into employment. And so I think this is an area where staffing is really important to help build those relationships. Curriculum. So here I pointed out some links to some documents on the NOFO page earlier. So the curriculum and instruction section of the NOFO is where this becomes important. That document that's pictured on the right there, the Clean Jobs Curriculum Framework, is available for download. And this is really going to provide a lot of detail about the delivery. It's not a course by course prescription for delivering. It's called a framework, so it kind of gives you the big picture of what's required for each occupational training program. But these the occupations that are included in this document are those that are kind of the focus of the CJIP programs. So the hubs should also include bridge programs, employability skills. Another link on that NOFO website is the Illinois Essential Employability Skills document that can provide a lot of information about those types of programs. There's also, as I mentioned, the link to the Clean Energy Jobs Training Program inventory, so you can see existing programs in your local region. There's also a lot of information in the CEJA stakeholder outreach documents. We met with a lot of stakeholders. We met with employers. We met with training providers. We met with community-based organizations. And so we gathered a lot of information through that process that is summarized in that outreach report. And there is a lot of good, this is where some of those best practices are listed, where we've got a lot of good feedback about what these stakeholders would like to see included in the programs and the way that they are delivered. Again, organize your thoughts around how you're going to address these programs. Think about the training programs. There are a lot of different training programs included in that that curriculum framework. Hubs are not required to deliver all of those, to offer all of those training programs. But you should do an analysis of the needs in your local area. It's going to differ from region to region across the state, which programs are going to be needed by employers in your local area. So really looking for you to do an analysis of your local area and what sorts of occupations employers are trying to hire people to fill. And so you might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different occupations that you're proposing to provide training for. And so, you know, what's going to be the staff required for each of them? How are those programs going to be delivered? You know, in the stakeholder outreach stakeholder outreach that we did, we heard a lot about flexible delivery being important for equity. There needs to be different ways that participants can access these training programs. Think about, you know, both online and in person, for example, both day, evening classes, you know, maybe short intensive programs and the same content delivered over a longer period of time. So if people are continuing to work in a job, that they have the opportunity to participate. So just thinking about, you know, how you can be flexible in the way you deliver the program, and the equity implications for the way that those training programs are delivered. You know, what equipment and supplies are going to be required. Of course, that has budget implications. Okay, so now we'll move to funding information. So again, this is for the Workforce Network, the hubs. So a total of, oh, sorry, this is, I'm sorry, I have the wrong slide up here. This is still from the, I apologize, from the pre-apprenticeship program, but there's a section that looks just like this for the workforce hubs that lays out total funding along with expected funding for each hub. I have it right here. So for this, for the network hubs, there is a total, maybe I have about 23 million for the hubs, along with an additional 15 million for the barrier reduction services, and that's on an annual basis for the first year. And so they're expecting awards to range anywhere from $500,000 up to $3 million for delivery. Some hubs have more equity eligible participants in their local area than others. And so there may be a significant variation in the level of funding for the various hubs. So that, yeah, 500 to 3 million for the network program, plus an additional 500,000 to $2 million for barrier reduction, for a total of between $1 and $5 million for each hub. I apologize for having the wrong slide up there. So there's a budget template. Again, on that NOFO webpage, there are a number of links to other NOFO materials. That top one, the NOFO is the NOFO document. But another link is a budget template, and that's an Excel spreadsheet where you can put all the details of your budget into it, and it automatically adds the total and summarizes your budget on a page. But you go page by page through these various categories of budget: personnel, fringe benefits, travel, all these various types of costs that will go into your budget to deliver your services. Again, the eligibility. So this also included in the NOFO. It spells out what eligible community-based organizations look like. It's really a capacity-based eligibility description. They're looking for organizations that are ability to effectively serve all individuals, including diverse and equity-focused populations, ability to recruit, pre-screen, and provide training, organizations that have agreements with employers showing that this employer has agreed to hire graduates of my programs, or employers that are willing to provide work-based learning for participants as they're going through their training. Again, so eligibility based on the organization's ability to provide the services that are within the NOFO. There's a number of other requirements that, in addition to your narrative grant application, these other forms and attachments that are required. One is a uniform grant application. That this is just providing information, kind of the details about your organization. And this is just a PDF that is, you fill in the blanks, the various questions, information about your organization needs to be signed by somebody responsible in the organization. Again, that budget needs to be filled out. It's an Excel spreadsheet. I think some guidance on that will also be provided as part of the GATA training, I believe. And then there's a conflict of interest disclosure form that must be signed by the applicant, and also some mandatory disclosures. Again, these are sort of kind of legal documents that make sure you don't have conflicts of interest within the funding system, things like that. But all required. If one or more of these documents is missing from your application will not even move to the scoring process. So these are just check boxes that you need to make sure are included as part of your application package. So let's walk through the application submission information. Like I said, the NOFO spells out exactly what should be included in your narrative application. And I'll walk through each of these sections one by one. It starts with a one-page overview, executive summary of your project. Page limits attached to all of these. So you have that one-page executive summary, And then you have a 20-page limit on what's called the technical proposal. And the technical proposal includes 4 components. First is the application team organization capacity and qualifications. What's the capacity of your organization and your partners, and what are the qualifications of the personnel within those organizations? 4-page limit on that. Documentation of need, 2 pages. Again, I'll walk through some detail about each of these. Project plan, this is really the meat of the how you're going to deliver this project. And then finally, a budget narrative where you kind of explain what's included in your budget and how it relates to the services that you're going to be delivering. So the first page, executive summary. And again, this is language taken directly from the NOFO. It spells out exactly what is expected within your executive summary. The description of the team that is leading this project. You need to identify which network hub that you are going to serve. Identify any partnerships that you have, with apprenticeship programs, community-based organizations, training programs, whoever you might be partnering with. A brief description of the services that you're going to be providing. You provide more detail about all of these in your project description, but just kind of hit the highlights here in the executive summary. And finally, anticipated outcomes and the total grant amount requested. So technical proposal. This is where you're going to describe your outcome, your activities and outcomes, how you're going to deliver this program. It's an important point is that each section of this technical proposal, it corresponds with the way the application is going to be reviewed and how it's going to be scored. And I'll walk through the details of that. But the NOFO is very clear about how it's going to be scored, what points are awarded for each component of this technical proposal, and they correspond with each other. So the first part is that application team. High-level information about the lead applicant's organization size, structure, and history. Also describe any partner organizations that are going to be part of the project. Want to see a list of key staff and instructors. And what's the role of each person? This table that's shown on the right is included in the NOFO as table A. It's on page 36, where it gives some structure for you to be able to do this. Really important that you're demonstrating that the experience and the knowledge of the team, that team is going to be able to successfully deliver the services that you're proposing to provide. Also, not just this is organizational level, so there needs to be a description about the facilities also that will be used to deliver these programs. Where will the training classes take place, for example? What sort of equipment do you already have or do you need to deliver these programs? And as I said, this section, this is the section about the applicant team in the project description. It corresponds with the review criteria. So this is on page 22. So like this applicant team qualifications and capacity counts for 35% of the overall score of the application. And these four separate criteria are spelled out. 10% goes to the applicant's qualifications and capacity to administer the program. Another 10% to the related experience and qualification of the staff, and so on. So as you're writing your proposal, make sure you're addressing these, because the people that are scoring the application, this is the criteria they're going to use to score your applications. The next section is the documentation of need. Identify what region you're proposing to serve. Identify specific equity eligible investment populations and communities within that area. This is where you're going to look at the employment needs and target occupations. This is making the case for the training programs that you're going to propose to deliver. Describe the expected impact of the project on the target populations, communities, and job growth. Any other contextual details about your community that might be helpful for the reviewers. Again, application review criteria, 10% of the total scoring is based on the documentation of need. The project plan, again, 12 pages here. So this is how you're going to deliver the services. Again, I apologize for having the pre-apprenticeship section up here, but it's on pages 17 to 19 of the NOFO. But this, again, a lot of bullet points about the project plan and what is required for the services. These are the correct criteria for the Workforce Hub's review criteria. So this is a really important section. 12 pages out of the 20, 40% of the overall total score. You can see 15% focused on the quality of the training program design, curriculum delivery, how you're addressing the integration of the curriculum framework and the bridge program curriculum. So again, as you're writing your application, make sure that your application addresses each of these areas, because again, this is how your application will be scored. A budget narrative. So again, 2 pages for this. You have your budget document, that Excel spreadsheet with all the details of the various pieces of your budget. Here's where you explain how you're going to use those funds to deliver the services. Talk about how the spending of those funds will be used to deliver the services, how they will lead to the outcomes that you're proposing within your proposal. That needs to be information. If you have partner agreements or subcontractors, here is where you name those, as well as in the budget document, the budget itself. You might also have other funding sources or other partners that you're going to leverage in addition to the funds that you're applying for through this program. And here, this is where you describe those leverage funds. Like, yeah, we're receiving funds from this other program that will work well with this CJA program, or this employer or this employer association is providing us with materials at no cost that we will be able to use in our training programs, or they're providing us with work-based learning opportunities. Those are the kinds of resources that you might be leveraged leveraging in addition to the funds you're receiving as part of the as part of your application. Again, 15% based on that cost effectiveness budget description. Cost effectiveness ability to, so those leveraged resources are part of the scoring criteria. So if you can identify resources to use in addition to the grant funds, you do get credit for that in your application. There are some attachments that are required, as well as that 20-page program description. And I'll walk through each of those if we have enough time. These can all be found again on that NOFO webpage. Attachments can be downloaded individually under the NOFO materials section. First is the proposed work plan, where you're going to describe the number of participants that you're going to recruit, serve, and eventually complete your programs. And it requires these estimates both for year one as well as quarter by quarter throughout your program year. You may have cohorts, for example, that you're going to serve participants throughout the year. And so this asks you to estimate those participants and completions throughout that year. The next attachment is the demographics and that you expect to serve through your program. How many are you going to recruit? How many are get enrolled in your training programs? How many do you expect to come from the various target equity eligible communities? How many do you expect to go into each of your various training programs that you're going to administer? And then how many do you expect to move into employment after completion or into other training programs, for example? Curriculum plan. So the third attachment is the details about the training programs that you're going to provide. You know, what are the modules, for example, that are included as components within your training program? What are some ways that you're demonstrating the need for that specific occupational training? And I know this is very difficult to read, but it is included. You can download this again from the NOFO website. And then I think the final attachment is that staffing plan. Again, staffing included as part of the narrative, but there is also, this is an attachment that's expected where you lay it out in this table form to identify who's filling each of those roles. And there may be cases where you know, some of these roles will need to be filled at some point in the future, and that's fine. If you don't have somebody in that role, that we expect to need to hire somebody for some of these roles, so that's fine as part of your application. So let's again kind of walk through the review process for the applications. Again, as I showed, each section of that project description has an associated point score available to it. So the process is that all of the applications will be received and put into the region that they're proposing to serve. And then it will go through a scoring process. So the way this works is there are teams of, typically it's a combination of DCEO personnel, people from partner organizations that have experience in workforce development, typically a a combination of that they really like to get outside people to review these, so that they'll get people from other workforce development organizations, other state agencies to help them review these. And they're scored based on those review criteria that are included in the NOFO. And then the highest scoring application in each region will be prioritized. And then that moves to what they call a negotiation process, where DCO works with that organization that submitted that application to see if they can come up with an agreement. It may be fine as is. There may need to be some adjustment. If all the applications, say, come in on the high end of the funding availability, there might not be enough funds to fund all of the grantees at the level that they're requesting. So there may have to be some sort of negotiation process to reach a final funding amount. So those are the kinds of things that might need to be negotiated through that process. And then if everyone comes to agreement, final budget, final scope of work documents and budget documents are prepared and goes through the legal process of everybody signing off on that, and then the funds can begin to be dispersed and the projects can get implemented. The next section of the NOFO, it may seem like a lot of sort of add-on stuff that is not important. Stuff in this section are not included as part of the application process and are not part of the scoring process. But it's really important that you understand what's in this section, because there are some expectations within this section that you need to make sure that you're prepared to deliver on. There are reporting requirements. It's just like any other government grant that you receive. You're going to have to do quarterly reports explaining, how you're spending the money. You're going to have to track your participants and track the data and upload the data into a reporting system. And you need to make sure that you include these sorts of activities in your budget as you're going through, because these are going to be expectations if you're successful in receiving this grant. So important. It may not seem important as you're reading through it the first time, but make sure as you're putting your proposal together that you're making sure that you have staff and budget capacity to address items that are in this section. And then the final step is that submission of your documents. So again, it's not just that 20-page narrative. There are a number of components that need to be included. So again, every application goes through what's called administrative review, and it's just a checklist. Did the applicant include all of these required documents? If you're missing any of these required documents, your application is not going to move forward to the scoring and consideration for funding. So you need to make sure that you include all of these required documents. And again, they're spelled out in the NOFO. So this grant applications will be accepted on a rolling basis, but there is a priority deadline of September 1st. So the first scoring pass will be done for applications that are received by September 1st. The reason there's this rolling basis is that this is a lot of grants in a lot of areas of the state, and if DCO does not receive an application, say, that is acceptable for one of the NOFO, one of the hub locations, they will continue to accept applications until they're able to fund somebody to run that hub. So if you're thinking about applying, though, yeah, if that hub gets funded by somebody that submits by that September 1st, of course, then that hub is no longer available for funding. So it's important that if you're thinking about funding, that you do get your application in by September 1st. DCO would also like you to submit a notice of intent to apply. If you're planning on applying, there's a little form on the NOFO website that they're asking you to fill out by August 11th. And this really is just to help them in their planning process for the review of the applications, help them get a sense for the number of applications that they're going to receive so they can start putting together teams of reviewers for those applications. This is an electronic submission process. So as we all know, technical difficulties can derail last second. So if at all possible, try to be as far in advance of that 5 p.m. on September 1st deadline as you can, just to make sure that you don't internet outage or something like that unexpected does not derail your plan. I think it's also a good idea to put together a draft of your proposal and have somebody outside of your organization review it to see if it makes sense to them. It's always difficult to review our own work, especially something that we've been developing over a number of weeks or a number of months. So I think this is a really valuable tip here, to have somebody that has not seen your application yet review it to see if does your proposal make sense? Does it seem like you're addressing all of the issues in that NOFO and the scoring criteria? Some timelines going forward for each of the NOFOs, the network program timeline. There was bidders conference last Friday, I believe it was. The recording is being processed. It should be up and available on the website within the next day or so. Here we are today at the writing an effective proposal. Later this week, that Grants 101 GATA training webinar, some of that technical piece of what's required. In the first week of August, we're going to schedule some technical assistance office hours. We did this for the pre-apprenticeship program as well. And so as you're putting your proposal together, you may have some questions about the things in the NOFO, ways you might address certain pieces of the NOFO. So watch for those office hours where you can come and get some one-on-one technical assistance about various sections of the NOFO. Again, August 11th, we appreciate it if you could submit that notice of intent to apply, or now, if you know you're going to do it now, it's available just to help DCO plan for that process. And again, if you want to be in that first round of reviews, need to be submitted by September 1st at 5 p.m. There also are some networking fairs going on, as I mentioned, which I think I have some detail about here in a minute. The Navigator timeline, the bidders conference last Friday also included this program, but there was an earlier one on June 13th that the recording is available for. Again, a lot of the webinars that we're doing here is kind of double duty for both the Navigator and the Workforce Hub. So the GATA training later this week. Here we're asking, deadline on this one is earlier than the Workforce Hub. So we're asking if you could let DCO know by July 27th if you're planning on applying. Again, I think those office hours that I mentioned will be both for the Navigator and Workforce Hubs programs. Like the Workforce Hubs, the Navigator applications will be on a rolling basis, but for that first round of reviews, if you know you're going to apply, shoot for getting it in by that August 15th deadline. Some of these networking fairs, the Workforce Hub's NOFO website, I think, also has a link to this where you can sign up for these upcoming. So if you're looking for partners in your area, these are in-person sessions where you have a chance to meet potential partners. Coming up, we are planning one, still working on the logistics of one in the Chicago, on the west side of Chicago coming up, but that will be announced soon as well. Lots of good information on the NOFO web pages. That's the Workforce Hub. I had the link for the Navigator site earlier in my in the slides, and that slides will be available. I think they got posted in the chat also, so you can find them there. Submit questions. I'll have an email address that you can submit questions to here in just a second. And as I said, any questions that we are not getting to in the chat today will be responded to in those FAQ responses that are posted on the webpage. And then finally, with a minute and a half to spare, our final slide. And so this is the email address you can send questions about any of the NOFOs to, and they will be responded to. We can't respond to them directly back to you because this is a public process. So any question we get, we create a response to and post it on the FAQ site so that everybody has the opportunity to review the answers to all of the questions that were submitted. So thanks everyone for participating. Thanks to my team for responding to questions as they could in the chat and providing clarifications as I went. And look forward to either seeing you in future webinars or hopefully working with you if you become a grantee and start delivering these programs.
Thanks, Brian. I've been answering questions in the chat. If you have another question, we'll stay on for another couple minutes, and I'll continue to monitor that chat. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Brian, for the presentation.